Some journeys last only a few hours. Others begin the moment you find yourself sitting beside the one person you thought you would never see again. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country below. And if you believe some apologies arrive years too late, like this story and subscribe. Now, back to the journey. Daniel Brooks had boarded Flight 728 with one simple goal. Keep his head down, answer a few work emails, sleep if he could, and be home before midnight. The airport had been unusually calm that afternoon. A soft announcement echoed across the terminal while the smell of fresh coffee drifted from a nearby cafe. Travelers hurried past with rolling suitcases clicking against the polished floor. It was the kind of ordinary day that promised nothing memorable. He glanced once at his boarding pass. 14A window seat. Perfect. He slipped his carry-on into the overhead compartment and settled into the narrow seat. Outside, a light rain blurred the runway, turning every airport light into soft golden streaks. Passengers continued filing into the cabin. A child laughed somewhere behind him. A flight attendant smiled as she guided people toward their rows. The low hum of the aircraft slowly filled the silence. Daniel reached for his phone. Then someone stopped beside his row. He looked up. His fingers froze before they touched the screen. Emily Harper. For one suspended heartbeat, neither of them moved. She held the same boarding pass-style envelope every passenger carried, dressed in a simple cream sweater beneath a dark coat, her chestnut hair resting neatly on her shoulders. She looked older than the woman he had signed divorce papers with 4 years earlier, not because of age, but because peace had quietly replaced the exhaustion he remembered. She met his eyes, not with anger, not with surprise, only recognition. Seat 14B, she said softly after checking her boarding pass. Daniel stood without saying a word, stepping into the aisle to let her pass. The space between them measured only a few inches. It somehow felt wider than the 4 years that had separated their lives. Emily thanked him with a small nod before taking her seat. No awkward smile followed. No attempt at conversation. Only the sound of fabric brushing against the seat and the quiet click of her seat belt. Daniel stared toward the rain outside the window. His jaw tightened. He had imagined dozens of ways they might meet again someday. A grocery store, a family wedding, perhaps a courthouse. Never 30,000 feet above the ground with nowhere to walk away. Passengers around them remained blissfully unaware. To everyone else, they were simply two strangers assigned neighboring seats. Only Daniel knew he had once promised this woman forever. Only Emily knew exactly how that promise had unraveled. The captain welcomed everyone aboard. Cabin doors closed with a heavy thud. The aircraft pushed away from the gate. Daniel finally allowed himself one careful glance. Emily was looking out her own window across the aisle reflection, calm, distant, almost untouchable. Then the flight attendant stopped beside their row, smiled politely, looked at both boarding passes, and quietly said something that made Daniel realize this ordinary flight was about to become the longest journey of his life. The hardest conversations rarely begin with words. Sometimes, they begin with two people pretending they no longer know each other. The flight attendant smiled with the effortless warmth reserved for strangers. "Welcome aboard." She glanced at Daniel Brooks, then at Emily Harper, confirming their seat numbers before moving on to greet the next passengers. To everyone else, nothing seemed unusual. Two travelers, two neighboring seats. Another routine afternoon flight, leaving Seattle under a sky washed gray by light rain. The cabin lights softened as the aircraft slowly rolled away from the gate. Daniel adjusted the air vent above him, more to occupy his restless hands than because he felt warm. Beside him, Emily folded her dark coat neatly across her lap before resting her hands together. The silver band of a simple wristwatch caught the muted light from the window. She had always liked arriving early. She still did. The realization settled inside him before he could stop it. Some habits survived even after love disappeared. The safety demonstration began. Passengers half listened while fastening seat belts or scrolling through their phones. A businessman across the aisle opened a laptop. A young couple quietly shared headphones. Somewhere toward the back, a baby fussed before drifting into silence. Everything felt ordinary. Except row 14. Daniel kept his eyes fixed ahead. He told himself not to look. Not again. The engines gradually grew louder, vibrating gently beneath the cabin floor. Then Emily spoke. "I think that's yours." Her voice was calm, almost unfamiliar. He turned. His boarding pass had slipped from the seat pocket onto the floor between them. Thanks. One word. Nothing more. She offered a polite nod before returning her attention to the window. The exchange lasted only seconds, yet it carried the weight of 4 silent years. As the aircraft accelerated down the runway, Daniel instinctively gripped the armrest. The city outside blurred into streaks of silver and green before disappearing beneath layers of cloud. For a brief moment, sunlight pierced through the overcast sky. The cabin filled with warm golden light. Daniel remembered another flight, another window seat. Emily had fallen asleep against his shoulder before they reached cruising altitude. He had refused to move for nearly 2 hours because he didn't want to wake her. When she finally opened her eyes, she had laughed softly and apologized. You should have moved. I didn't want to. Back then, staying still had felt effortless. Now, sitting beside her without speaking required every ounce of strength he possessed. The seatbelt sign remained illuminated. Emily quietly removed a novel from her carry-on, but didn't open it. Instead, she rested it on her lap, absent-mindedly tracing the edge of its cover with one finger. Daniel noticed the gesture immediately. She used to do that whenever she was thinking. Not nervous. Thinking. He wondered what occupied her mind now. The divorce? The years between them? Or perhaps nothing connected to him at all. That possibility unsettled him more than he expected. Outside, endless clouds stretched beneath the aircraft like an untouched white ocean. There was nowhere else to look. Nowhere else to go. The narrow cabin had become its own quiet world, suspended between the lives they had left behind and the destinations waiting ahead. Daniel slowly exhaled. For the first time since she had taken the seat beside him, he realized the greatest distance between two people was never measured in miles. It was measured in everything that had been left unsaid. At 30,000 feet, memories don't knock. They simply take the empty seat beside you. The aircraft leveled above the clouds, and the steady vibration beneath the cabin floor settled into a quiet rhythm. The seatbelt sign remained on for a few more minutes before a gentle chime echoed through the cabin. Passengers relaxed almost instantly. Laptop screens opened. Coffee orders drifted through the aisle. Conversations rose into soft murmurs. Daniel Brooks remained perfectly still. Beside him, Emily Harper finally opened the novel she had been holding since takeoff. She read only a single page before slipping a bookmark between the sheets and closing it again. She wasn't reading. She was somewhere else. Daniel recognized that distant look. Years ago, she wore the same expression whenever she watched rain fall against their apartment window on Sunday mornings. She would wrap both hands around a mug of coffee without taking a sip, lost in thoughts she rarely spoke aloud. Back then, he had assumed silence meant everything was fine. Now he wondered how many quiet moments had actually been cries he never heard. A flight attendant arrived with a warm smile. Would either of you like something to drink? Emily answered first. Tea, please. Chamomile. Of course. Daniel almost smiled before catching himself. He hadn't heard her order that tea in years, yet somehow he remembered it before remembering what he wanted himself. Black coffee, he replied. The attendant nodded and continued down the aisle. Neither of them spoke. The silence between them no longer felt awkward. It felt familiar. Outside the oval window, endless white clouds stretched beneath the aircraft like fresh snow untouched by footprints. The afternoon sun rested high above them, transforming the sky into an impossible shade of blue. Emily looked outside. So strange. Daniel turned slightly. The weather? She shook her head. No. Her voice remained gentle. How quickly the clouds make the world below disappear. The words lingered. Daniel followed her gaze. Nothing of the cities remained visible. No highways. No neighborhoods. No places where people had once promised forever. Only light. He remembered another flight many years earlier. It had been their anniversary trip to Vermont. Emily had spent half the journey pressing her forehead against the window, pointing excitedly whenever mountain peaks appeared through the clouds. You always miss the best views, she had teased after he woke from a nap. I've got the better view right here, he had answered, smiling without embarrassment. She had laughed so freely then. The memory arrived with astonishing clarity. Not because it was extraordinary, because it was ordinary. And ordinary moments were the ones he missed the most. The drinks arrived. Emily wrapped both hands around the warm paper cup before taking a careful sip. Daniel reached for his coffee at the exact same moment. Their fingers brushed for barely a second. Both immediately pulled away. "I'm sorry," Daniel said instinctively. Emily looked at him. "You always apologized first." The observation carried no bitterness, only quiet surprise. Daniel lowered his eyes. "I wasn't very good at apologizing when it mattered." Emily didn't answer. Instead, she stared into the rising steam above her tea. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It simply allowed the truth to exist between them without asking either of them to explain it. Somewhere ahead, the captain announced favorable weather for the remainder of the flight. Passengers barely listened. A movie began playing several rows back. Someone laughed softly. Life inside the cabin continued exactly as it should. Yet for Daniel, every passing minute uncovered another memory he had buried beneath years of routine, pride, and unfinished regret. He had boarded expecting only another business trip. Instead, somewhere above an endless sea of clouds, he found himself revisiting a life he had once believed was too far behind to ever return. Sometimes life waits for the sky to shake before it reminds us who once made us feel safe. The first tremor was almost too gentle to notice. A slight vibration passed beneath the cabin floor, causing a few coffee cups to ripple. Most passengers barely looked up. The seatbelt sign chimed back to life, glowing amber above the aisle. The captain's voice arrived calmly through the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've encountered a patch of unstable air. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts." The cabin responded with practiced routine. Laptops closed. Conversations paused. A flight attendant secured the service cart before taking her jump seat. Daniel Brooks clicked his seatbelt into place again and instinctively glanced toward the window. Outside, the endless blanket of white clouds had given way to towering gray formations. The aircraft slipped between them, disappearing into a world of mist where even the sunlight seemed uncertain. A stronger jolt followed. Not violent, just unexpected. Several passengers inhaled sharply. A child somewhere near the back asked his mother if everything was all right. "It's just a little bump," she answered with reassuring calm. Daniel turned without thinking. Emily Harper had placed one hand lightly against the armrest. Her fingers tightened for only a moment before relaxing again. She wasn't frightened, just alert. He remembered that expression. She had never been afraid of flying. She simply disliked surprises she couldn't control. Another gentle drop shifted the aircraft. Before Daniel had time to think, the words escaped him. "Are you okay?" Emily looked at him. The question hung quietly between them, not because of what he asked, because of how naturally he had asked it. Exactly the same way he had dozens of times years before. Whenever traffic stopped suddenly, whenever winter roads turned icy, whenever thunderstorms rattled their apartment windows. "Are you okay?" For a brief second, time folded in on itself. Emily's lips curved into the faintest smile. "I am," she answered with the same quiet confidence she had always carried. "And you?" Daniel almost laughed. It was such a simple question, one he realized he hadn't answered honestly in years. "I'm fine." The words sounded automatic. Emily studied him for only a heartbeat before turning back toward the window. She didn't challenge the answer. She didn't need to. The aircraft steadied. Clouds gradually thinned until streaks of afternoon sunlight poured through the windows once again. The passengers relaxed almost immediately. Movies resumed. Books reopened. The businessman across the aisle returned to typing as though nothing had happened. Only Daniel remained unsettled. Not because of the turbulence. Because his first instinct had still been to protect her. No matter how many years had passed. No matter how completely their lives had changed. Some habits survived heartbreak. He leaned back and closed his eyes for a moment. A memory surfaced with remarkable clarity. Years ago, during another flight, Emily had reached for his hand as they flew through rough weather over Colorado. She hadn't squeezed tightly. She had simply rested her fingers against his, trusting he would be there until the sky became calm again. He had held her hand the entire time. Not because she asked, because letting go had never crossed his mind. The memory faded as quickly as it arrived. Daniel opened his eyes. Emily was watching the sunlight spill across the clouds, peaceful and distant, as though she had already made peace with chapters he was only beginning to reopen. He wondered whether healing always looked this quiet, or whether it only appeared effortless after someone had carried the weight alone for a very long time. The engines continued their steady hum toward the horizon. Beyond the windows, the storm had already been left behind. Inside row 14, however, another kind of weather was only beginning to change. The truth rarely arrives as an argument. More often, it appears as a conversation that should have happened years earlier. The cabin had settled into an almost peaceful rhythm. The engines hummed with quiet confidence. Afternoon sunlight drifted through the windows, painting soft bands of gold across folded tray tables and resting hands. Most passengers had disappeared into their own worlds. Some slept beneath thin airline blankets. Others watched silent movies, their faces illuminated by glowing screens. Daniel Brooks stared into the dark surface of his cooling coffee. He had rehearsed countless conversations with Emily Harper over the past 4 years. Some ended in anger, others in apology. None of them had ever happened. Now she sat less than 2 feet away, and neither of them seemed eager to disturb the fragile calm surrounding them. Emily gently turned the paper cup in her hands. Without looking at him, she asked quietly, "Do you still travel this much?" Daniel looked up, almost surprised she had spoken first. "More than I should." She smiled faintly. "You always said airports felt easier than staying still." He let out a slow breath. "I actually said that." "You did." The memory carried no accusation, only accuracy. For years, Daniel had buried himself in work. Every promotion had come with another flight, another hotel room, another excuse to postpone difficult conversations. Success had arrived exactly as planned. Peace never had. "What about you?" he asked. Emily looked toward the clouds beyond the window. "I travel sometimes. For work. For myself." The answer lingered. Daniel noticed something different about her voice. It no longer searched for approval. She wasn't trying to impress him or convince him. She simply answered. There was remarkable freedom in that simplicity. "You seem—" Daniel hesitated. She waited patiently. "Happier." Emily considered the word before nodding. "I think I'm quieter." Daniel frowned slightly. "Is there a difference?" She smiled, this time a little more openly. "I didn't know there was until recently." The sentence settled gently between them. Daniel realized he wanted to ask dozens of questions. What had she done after the divorce? Where had she gone? Who had stood beside her when he no longer did? But somehow none of those questions felt like they belonged to him anymore. Instead, he asked the only one that mattered. "Did you ever hate me?" Emily remained silent for several seconds. Not because she struggled to answer, because she wanted to answer honestly. When everything ended, she paused, watching sunlight slide across the wing outside. "I was hurt." Daniel lowered his eyes. "I know." "No." Her voice stayed calm. "I don't think you did." He looked back at her. "If you had known, I don't think you would have been so surprised when I finally left." The words carried no sharp edges, only truth. Daniel couldn't disagree. During the last year of their marriage, he had noticed her becoming quieter. He had mistaken silence for patience, distance for independence, exhaustion for understanding. Looking back now, he realized she hadn't stopped speaking. He had stopped listening. The realization settled heavily inside him. Not dramatic, not overwhelming, simply undeniable. Emily rested both hands around her cup again. "I don't blame the person you were." She spoke almost to herself. "We were both younger." Daniel swallowed carefully. "And the person I became?" She looked at him with steady hazel eyes that held neither resentment nor longing. "I don't know him anymore." Outside, the aircraft continued its quiet journey through endless sunlight. Inside row 14, Daniel understood something he had never allowed himself to admit. The greatest loss in his life had not been the day the marriage ended. It had begun much earlier, in all the ordinary moments when the woman beside him had quietly needed to be heard, and he had mistaken her silence for contentment. Some wounds don't remain open because they never healed. They remain open because no one ever asked how they were made. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as the afternoon drifted toward evening. Beyond the windows, the brilliant blue sky slowly softened into pale shades of gold. The clouds below looked almost motionless, like endless fields of white stretching beyond the horizon. The captain announced they had reached cruising altitude. Everything felt remarkably calm. Daniel Brooks wished his thoughts would do the same. For several minutes, neither he nor Emily Harper spoke. They simply existed within the same narrow space, separated by an armrest and 4 years of unfinished silence. Finally, Daniel looked toward her. "There was something I never understood." Emily turned her head. "What was that?" "The day you left." She remained quiet, allowing him to continue. You didn't argue. He swallowed carefully. You didn't even cry. Emily lowered her eyes to the paper cup resting between her hands. I had cried before that day. Daniel felt those words settle inside him with unexpected weight. For a long time, her voice remained gentle. You just weren't there to see it. The sentence carried no accusation, only memory. Daniel searched for an answer that refused to come. Instead, Emily continued speaking, not to defend herself, but as though she had finally reached a place where the truth no longer frightened her. I kept thinking that if I explained things differently, maybe you'd understand. She smiled faintly at the thought. So I tried again. Her fingers traced the rim of the empty cup. And again, outside, sunlight reflected across the aircraft wing. The bright surface shimmered before disappearing into another layer of clouds. Then one day, Emily said quietly, I realized I had stopped hoping. Daniel closed his eyes for a brief moment. He remembered late evenings when he returned home long after dinner, the television glowing silently. Emily already asleep on the couch with a book resting across her lap. He used to believe she had simply grown tired early. Now another possibility unfolded before him. Perhaps she had only grown tired of waiting. I thought I was building a future for us, Daniel admitted. Emily nodded. I know. The answer surprised him. You know, I never doubted your intentions. She looked directly at him. I only wished you had noticed what it was costing us. Daniel couldn't speak. His promotions, his business trips, the endless meetings. Every achievement had seemed necessary. Every sacrifice had felt temporary. Until one day there had been nothing left to sacrifice except the marriage itself. I don't regret working hard, he said quietly. Emily smiled with quiet understanding. You shouldn't. He looked confused. But I do regret believing success could replace presence. The words surprised even him. They had arrived without rehearsal, without pride, simply true. Emily studied him for a moment before looking back toward the window. That's something I hoped you'd discover. Daniel frowned gently. You hoped? She nodded. Not for me. A peaceful silence followed. For yourself. Those two words changed everything. For the first time since seeing her at the boarding gate, Daniel understood that Emily was no longer trying to explain the past. She wasn't asking him to carry guilt. She wasn't measuring whether he deserved forgiveness. She had already walked beyond those questions. The realization brought both relief and sorrow. Because the woman sitting beside him no longer belonged to the chapter where they had failed each other. She belonged to the life she had patiently rebuilt after closing that door. The captain's voice returned over the speakers. We've begun our initial descent. We'll be landing in approximately 40 minutes. Passengers stirred around the cabin. Window shades lifted. Hooks closed. Seatbacks clicked upright. The ordinary rhythm of travel quietly resumed. Daniel looked once more at Emily. For hours, he had believed this flight was forcing him to revisit the past. Only now did he understand its real purpose. It wasn't asking him to remember who she had been. It was asking him to finally see the woman she had become and the man he still had time to become himself. Some endings don't ask to be rewritten. They only ask to be understood before the last page turns. The aircraft had begun its gradual descent. Outside the windows, the brilliant afternoon sky slowly gave way to scattered layers of cloud. Far below, patches of rivers, highways, and neighborhoods slowly returned to view, reminding every passenger that the journey was nearing its end. A familiar announcement echoed softly through the cabin. We'll be landing in approximately 25 minutes. Please ensure your seatbacks are upright and larger electronic devices are safely stored. People stirred almost immediately. Blankets were folded. Books disappeared into backpacks. Headphones slipped away. The quiet rhythm of arrival had begun. Daniel Brooks found himself wishing the captain had announced another 3 hours instead. There were still too many things he had never said. Emily Harper looked out the window, watching the landscape gradually sharpen beneath the clouds. The reflection in the glass revealed a peaceful expression Daniel had never truly noticed before. Years ago, he had mistaken peace for something simple. Now he understood it had been earned. Emily. She turned gently toward him. I've been thinking. A faint smile touched her face. I noticed. Despite everything, the small trace of humor eased the heaviness between them. Daniel looked down at his folded hands. I spent years telling myself the divorce happened because we wanted different lives. Emily remained silent. He continued. But sitting here, he paused, searching for words honest enough to survive the moment. I don't think that's true anymore. Emily waited. I think we wanted the same life. He finally looked at her. I just stopped showing up for it. The sentence remained suspended between them. Emily didn't rush to answer. She had once spent years filling every silence. She no longer felt responsible for doing that. Finally, she spoke. You love the future. Daniel frowned slightly. And you? I needed someone who could also love the present. The simplicity of her answer left no room for argument. Only understanding. Daniel leaned back slowly. How many dinners had he promised to make up later? How many birthdays had become business trips? How many ordinary evenings had disappeared beneath meetings he could barely remember now? He had always believed there would be another weekend, another vacation, another chance. He had never imagined that love could quietly expire while waiting for tomorrow. I've replayed our last year together so many times, he admitted. Emily nodded softly. I don't anymore. He looked at her with quiet surprise. I carried those memories everywhere at first. She rested one hand lightly on the armrest. But eventually, I realized memories aren't places we're meant to live. Outside, the city grew closer. Cars became visible on distant highways. Sunlight reflected from rooftops like scattered pieces of glass. Daniel followed her gaze. How did you do it? Emily understood the question immediately. How did you let go? She smiled gently. I didn't. Daniel looked confused. I carried it until it became lighter. The answer stayed with him. Healing, he realized, had never been about forgetting. It had been about learning to carry the past without allowing it to define every step afterward. The aircraft banked gently to the left. Wing flaps extended with a low mechanical hum. The runway would not be far away now. Around them, passengers prepared for arrival, unaware that two lives had quietly shifted somewhere above the clouds. Daniel felt the weight of time pressing against him. Only minutes remained before the cabin doors would open, before strangers reclaimed their separate lives, before Emily became another traveler walking through another airport. He understood there was still one truth left unsaid, not because he hoped it would change the ending, but because some words deserved to exist, even when they arrived too late. He drew a slow breath. Then, for the first time in 4 years, he gathered the courage to speak not as the man defending his choices, but as the man finally willing to face them. The words we fear the most are often the ones that arrive after we've stopped expecting to be forgiven. The landing gear unfolded beneath the aircraft with a deep mechanical thud. A gentle vibration passed through the cabin floor, reminding every passenger that the ground was no longer far away. Beyond the windows, the city stretched toward the horizon, its streets glowing beneath the late afternoon sun. The journey was almost over. Daniel Brooks knew that if he remained silent now, he would carry that silence for the rest of his life. He looked at Emily Harper. She was watching the skyline below, calm and thoughtful, as though she had already accepted that some people only return to our lives long enough to teach us something one last time. Emily. She turned toward him. Daniel held her gaze for a moment before speaking. I'm sorry. There was no explanation after it. No defense. No attempt to soften the weight of the words. Just the apology. I've said those words before, he continued quietly, but I don't think I ever understood what they meant. Emily listened without interrupting. I kept apologizing for individual moments. He smiled sadly. For being late. For missing dinner. For another canceled weekend. He lowered his eyes. I never apologized for making you feel alone while I was standing right beside you. The cabin remained filled with ordinary sounds. Seatbelts clicked. A baby laughed somewhere behind them. A flight attendant completed one final walk through the aisle. Life continued without noticing that one broken heart was finally speaking honestly. Daniel's voice became softer. You deserved someone who celebrated ordinary days with you. He let out a slow breath. You deserved someone who noticed when you stopped smiling. Emily's expression never changed. Not because the words meant nothing, but because they arrived after she had already healed from needing them. Daniel continued. I can't change any of it. No. Emily answered gently. You can't. He nodded. I know. Silence settled once more. Not empty. Complete. After a few moments, Emily reached into the side pocket of her handbag and removed something small. A folded photograph. The edges had softened with time. She looked at it briefly before handing it to him. Daniel unfolded it carefully. It was an old picture from years ago. The two of them stood beside a quiet lake during autumn. Emily was laughing at something outside the frame. Daniel wasn't looking at the camera. He was looking at her. He remembered that day immediately. Neither of them had any money. Their hotel had been tiny. They had eaten sandwiches on a wooden bench because every restaurant nearby was full. At the time, he had apologized for not planning something more impressive. Emily had called it the happiest weekend of her life. Daniel stared at the photograph. I forgot this existed. Emily smiled softly. I didn't. He looked up. Why did you keep it? She considered the question for a moment. Because not everything was sad. The answer caught him completely off guard. Our marriage ended. She looked at the picture once more. But our entire story wasn't a failure. Daniel felt his throat tighten. There were beautiful years too. Emily folded the photograph once again and slipped it back into her bag. I didn't want pain to rewrite all of them. Outside, the runway came into view. The aircraft floated lower, crossing above highways crowded with evening traffic. Daniel finally understood what forgiveness truly looked like. It wasn't forgetting. It wasn't returning. It wasn't pretending nothing had happened. It was allowing the good memories to remain beautiful without asking them to become the future again. The wheels touched the runway with a firm but gentle impact. A burst of reverse thrust filled the cabin as the aircraft slowed. Passengers instinctively applauded in scattered applause. Daniel barely noticed. Because somewhere between the clouds and the runway, the woman he had once called his wife had given him something far greater than another chance. She had given him the truth. And sometimes, the truth is the kindest farewell two people can ever share. Every journey ends at a gate. The ones that change us continue long after the doors have opened. The aircraft rolled slowly toward the terminal. Outside the window, orange evening lights settled across the runway, stretching long shadows behind parked airplanes waiting for their next departure. Ground crews moved with quiet precision. Baggage carts crossed the tarmac. Another ordinary day at another ordinary airport. Inside row 14, nothing felt ordinary anymore. The seatbelt sign remained illuminated. No one stood. No one hurried. For one last minute, everyone shared the same destination. Then the aircraft came to a gentle stop. A familiar chime echoed through the cabin. Welcome. Please remain seated until the seatbelt sign has been switched off. Passengers smiled with relief. Phones reconnected to cellular networks. Messages arrived in rapid succession. The world rushed back in. Daniel Brooks looked at his own screen as dozens of unread emails appeared. For the first time in years, he locked the phone without reading a single one. Some things no longer felt urgent. Beside him, Emily Harper quietly gathered her belongings. The same small handbag. The same novel she had barely opened. Nothing extravagant. Nothing designed to impress anyone. She carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who longer measured her worth by who walked beside her. The seatbelt sign finally disappeared. People immediately stood, reaching for overhead luggage. The familiar impatience returned. Suitcases slid from compartments. Children yawned. Business travelers checked their watches. Daniel reached up and carefully lowered Emily's suitcase before taking his own. He handed it to her without speaking. She accepted it with a grateful smile. Thank you. 2 simple words. Once, they had exchanged thousands of them without thinking. Now they carried unexpected warmth. The line slowly moved toward the aircraft door. Step by step, row by row. As they reached the exit, the flight attendant smiled politely. Have a wonderful evening. Emily thanked her first and stepped into the jet bridge. Daniel followed. The enclosed corridor felt strangely quiet after hours inside the cabin. Ahead of them, passengers gradually disappeared toward baggage claim. Their paths remained side by side for only a little longer. When they entered the terminal, the crowd immediately widened around them. Large windows filled the concourse with fading sunlight. Arrival boards flickered overhead. Families embraced. Children ran into waiting arms. Taxi drivers lifted handwritten signs. Life reunited people every few seconds. Emily stopped walking. So, she looked at Daniel with calm, familiar eyes. I guess this is where our flight ends. Daniel nodded slowly. I suppose it is. Neither of them reached for another apology. Neither searched for promises. Some endings become beautiful precisely because they are not interrupted. Daniel smiled. A genuine one. I hope your life is everything you wanted it to be. Emily returned the smile. It isn't. He looked surprised. She continued softly. It's different. A quiet laugh escaped both of them. And that's enough. Daniel understood exactly what she meant. Life had not given either of them perfection. It had given them perspective. Emily adjusted the strap on her shoulder. Take care of yourself, Daniel. You too. She hesitated for only a heartbeat. Then she walked away. Not dramatically, not looking back, simply continuing toward the life waiting beyond. The arrival gates. Daniel remained where he was. He watched until the crowd gently carried her from view. For years, he had believed the longest journey of his life would be measured by promotions, destinations, and miles flown across continents. He had been wrong. The longest journey had lasted only a few hours. It began the moment he sat beside the woman he thought he had lost forever. It ended the moment he realized she had never been the one who needed to change. As Daniel finally turned toward the terminal exit, the evening sun poured through the glass, warming the floor ahead of him like an open path. He walked into it alone, not lonely, simply determined to become someone who would never again confuse providing for love with being present in it. Some flights carry us to another city. Others carry us back to ourselves. This one had done both. And somewhere beyond the crowd, two people continued walking in different directions, not as strangers, not as lovers, but as two lives forever connected by what they had shared and forever changed by what they had finally understood. Sometimes the greatest destination is not reconciliation. It is acceptance, because the longest journey of his life was never the one through the sky. It was the one through his own heart.